According to Hinduism, the Yamuna River is considered a river of heaven and is believed to cleanse the mind of sin. Every year, thousands of people drink from and bathe in the water despite its toxic foam, which is the result of poorly treated sewage that's constantly dumped directly into the river. Various chemicals in the foam are known to have many negative health effects, including skin irritation, hair loss, breathing issues, and brain damage. Earlier this year, a former model and Miss Switzerland finalist was allegedly murdered by her husband, who then reportedly dismembered her body and pureed her remains in a blender. In 1947, there was a case in Louisiana where a young man failed to die during a botched electric chair execution, so his lawyers tried to argue that he had already been executed and that it was cruel to go through it a second time. After much deliberation, the Supreme Court eventually ruled against him, and the man was successfully executed by electric chair the next year. Amanda Eller was lost for 17 days in the Maui wilderness after a 3-mile hike turned into a full-on nightmare. She set out on foot without a phone, food, or water since she only planned to be out for a short adventure. But after veering off the trail, she wasn't able to find her way back. The 35-year-old later managed to survive a flash flood with a broken leg and suffered many hallucinations throughout the ordeal. She said she kept hearing voices that were telling her what to do if she wanted to survive. Amanda was eventually spotted by a helicopter pilot who turned a different way that nobody would normally search on a whim. In 2022, an Irish woman was hospitalized with extreme stomach pain and had to have her appendix removed after years of holding in farts around her boyfriend. Constance Fisher was a paranoid schizophrenic who murdered her 3 children in 1954 to save them from evil. She spent several years in a mental asylum before being released, only to kill 3 more of her children in 1966. In 1973, 16-year-old John Paul Getty III was kidnapped in Rome, with a $17 million ransom demanded from his billionaire grandfather, J. Paul Getty. But the former richest man in the world refused to pay, suspecting that the rebellious teenager was just trying to extract money from his tycoon grandfather. As time went on, the teenager's father pleaded with his dad to send the money, but the mogul argued that his 13 other grandchildren could also become kidnap targets if he paid. However, he was forced to change his tune when the kidnappers mailed Getty his grandson's severed ear and hair as a warning, so the billionaire negotiated the ransom down to $3 million. Paul was safely released after 5 months in captivity, but the experience left him completely traumatized, especially since his captors made him play Russian roulette several times. The teen quickly developed a drug addiction, which eventually led to a stroke caused by an overdose, and Getty was left severely disabled for the rest of his life. In 2012, Donna Summer died from lung cancer at the age of 63, even though she wasn't a smoker. The singer believed it was caused by inhaling the toxic fumes from the Twin Towers after they fell on 9/11, since the dust filled the air around Ground Zero for several months afterwards, and Summer lived nearby. In fact, around 6,400 people have since died from 9/11 related illnesses, more than double the amount that died on the actual day of the attacks. The Dani tribe in Indonesia is known to cut off parts of their fingers after the death of a loved one. In 1928, Alfred Lowenstein, the 3rd richest man in the world at the time, completely disappeared from his private jet in the middle of a flight. After Alfred took too long to use the bathroom, his secretary went in to check on him, but the bathroom was empty and the exit door connected to it was wide open. There have been many theories put forth, but Alfred most likely opened the wrong door by accident and plunged thousands of feet to his death. And last September, 39-year-old Florida mom Kathy Griffith was brutally stabbed to death by her teenage son Colin. He called 911 saying, "I had a very, very long fight with my mom. She fell on a knife and she's bleeding from the neck." Police arriving at the scene described Colin as showing zero emotion, and the first thing he said to them was, "I know my rights." This all transpired just 1 year after Colin was charged with fatally shooting his divorced father Charles, but was released on the claim of self-defense. Kathy trusted her son at the time and even bailed him out of jail. Leading up to Kathy's murder, Colin had reportedly threatened to kill his mother many times, but she continued to love him unconditionally. He was said to be a very spoiled child who had been in and out of mental facilities for years after being diagnosed with PTSD. According to reports, Colin developed this after being held captive by his father for over 1,000 days without human contact upon telling his dad that he was gay. Colin has been charged with first-degree murder, as prosecutors have described him as a violent murderer who must be kept separate from civil society. Pat Morita, the actor who played Mr. Miyagi, spent the first 9 years of his life in a hospital due to tuberculosis. After undergoing extensive surgery and finally learning how to walk, he was sent to a Japanese internment camp in Arizona. During the 4th century BC in Nordlingen, Germany, this 9-year-old boy became severely disabled following a leg infection, was killed by a blow to the head, then thrown into a grain silo that was reused as a garbage pit. A Queen's Guard horse named Obelisk used to lure in pigeons by dropping oats from his mouth. When they got close enough to him, he would brutally stomp them to death. Obelisk was eventually sent away for additional psychological training. Considered one of the greatest strength athletes of all time, Icelandic powerlifter John Paul Sigmarsson once famously said, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." A few years later, at the young age of 32, he died of an aortic rupture while deadlifting in his gym. In 2011, 6-year-old Illinois boy Timothy Pitson was taken out of school by his mother to go on a trip. She then ended her life and left a note saying Timothy is safe at the hands of someone trustworthy and would never be found. The boy hasn't been seen since, as here's an updated age progression image of what he may look like now. The Vietnamese version of Cinderella is much darker than the family-friendly version we know and love. In the end, Cinderella boils her stepsister to death, turns what remains of her into a sauce, and sends it to her stepmother to eat. She enjoys the sauce so much that she eats it all until she finds the skull of her dead daughter and dies from shock. In 2015, a 46-year-old woman accidentally took 55 milligrams of pure LSD, equal to a staggering 550 times the typical dosage. She apparently blacked out for the first 12 hours and felt pleasantly high for the second 12. The next day, her lifelong foot pain had ceased, which helped her kick her morphine addiction. Amanda Eller was lost for 17 days in the Maui wilderness after a 3-mile hike turned into a full-on nightmare. She set out on foot without a phone, food, or water since she only planned to be out for a short adventure. But after veering off the trail, she wasn't able to find her way back. The 35-year-old later managed to survive a flash flood with a broken leg and suffered many hallucinations throughout the ordeal. She said she kept hearing voices that were telling her what to do if she wanted to survive. Amanda was eventually spotted by a helicopter pilot who turned a different way that nobody would normally search on a whim. In 2022, an Irish woman was hospitalized with extreme stomach pain and had to have her appendix removed after years of holding in farts around her boyfriend. Constance Fisher was a paranoid schizophrenic who murdered her 3 children in 1954 to save them from evil. She spent several years in a mental asylum before being released, only to kill 3 more of her children in 1966. In 2016, a man who'd been continuously stalking Miranda Cosgrove apparently plotted to murder her. For 3 days, the stalker had been burying various weapons in Cosgrove's backyard, including knives and a rope. One day, he spent hours pacing around the area and eventually shot at a woman who looked like the iCarly actress. The man then performed self-immolation before turning the gun on himself right in Cosgrove's yard. Miranda has stated that she still lives in the same house but refuses to stay there alone ever since that traumatic incident. Earlier this year, inmates at a Miami prison managed to birth a child without ever even meeting each other face to face. 23-year-old Joanne DePaz and 29-year-old Daisy Link, both imprisoned for separate murder charges, started talking to each other through the air vents before falling in love and eventually wanting kids. Using a makeshift line made out of bedding, they passed Joanne's erectoplasm through the vents, while Daisy used a yeast infection applicator to inseminate herself. Against all odds, the plan worked, and the baby was born healthy. The pair are now in different prisons, while Joanne's mother is raising their baby girl. In 2021, Tessica Brown ran out of her regular hairspray, so she tried using Gorilla Glue spray instead. Her hair then became stuck to her scalp for more than a month, despite hundreds of attempts to wash it out. Brown says she felt so helpless that she stopped eating and lost more than 10 pounds over a short span. Eventually, a plastic surgeon performed a 4-hour-long surgery on her for free to remove the adhesive. Once described as a genius, Russian man Anatoly Moskvin was a well-respected linguist and historian until he was discovered to be living with the corpses of 26 girls in his parents' home. He apparently dug them up from local cemeteries before mummifying and dressing them like dolls. Anatoly's parents were well aware of the dolls but had no idea they contained real human corpses. After his arrest, Moskvin stated that he had great sympathy for the dead children and believed that one day they could be brought back to life through science or black magic. He's been forced to live in a mental hospital since 2012. In March of 1998, 23-year-old Virginia woman Amy Lynn Bradley was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship to Curacao when she suddenly vanished from the balcony of her cabin around 6 a.m. The Coast Guard conducted a 4-day search in surrounding waters but found no trace of her, so authorities concluded that she simply fell overboard and drowned. But in the years since, there have been several reported sightings of Amy that suggest she may have been kidnapped and forced into human trafficking. 1 year after she went missing, a U.S. Navy sailor claimed he met a woman named Amy in a Barbados brothel who matched her description and begged him for help, but he didn't report it at the time. In 2005, an anonymous email was sent to Amy's family containing 2 photographs of a sex worker who closely resembled Amy, but nothing ever came of it. Despite various other sightings of the woman with men holding on to her, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead in March of 2010, 12 years after her disappearance. In 2013, double amputee and 4-time Paralympic gold medalist Oscar Pistorius shot his girlfriend 3 times through a locked bathroom door, claiming he mistook her for an intruder. During his murder trial, Pistorius removed his prosthetics and hobbled on his stumps, while apparently attempting to garner sympathy and a more lenient sentence. But the judge wasn't buying it and sentenced the athlete to 15 years in prison for murder. This is the skeleton of a female vampire pinned to the ground with a sickle across her throat to prevent her from returning from the dead. It was found during an archaeological dig at a 17th century cemetery in Poland. In the late 1800s, there is an urban legend about a demonic figure roaming around the Arizona deserts that killed multiple people. It turned out to be a feral camel with the decaying corpse of a male soldier strapped to its back, likely the tragic result of Jefferson Davis's attempt to create a camel division in the U.S. Army. The double rainbow guy Paul Vasquez was a constant uploader on YouTube and created thousands of videos. Even though he died of an illness in 2020 at the age of 57, he scheduled 15 years of uploads in advance before he died, leaving his channel still very active now, 4 years after his death. This is the tragic transformation of Florida man Robert Hardister, who was arrested 9 separate times for various infractions over an 8-year span. British doctor Thomas Kwan recently attempted to murder his mother's partner in one of the strangest ways possible. He disguised himself as a nurse and knocked on the man's door to offer him a free COVID jab. But instead of the vaccine, he put an unidentified poison in the syringe and injected it into his stepdad's arm. The next day, the man experienced serious pain and blistering in his shoulder, prompting him to go to the hospital and having part of his arm removed. He ended up surviving the bizarre attack, and Kwan was charged with attempted murder. In 2015, Caitlyn Jenner rear-ended a 69-year-old woman at a red light who was thrown into oncoming traffic and fatally struck by a Hummer. Jenner claims the paparazzi was at fault for the crash after constantly stalking the reality star and pulling up too closely to Caitlyn's car. The case was settled outside of court as Jenner avoided any charges for the tragedy. Shoes discovered in the wreckage of the Titanic are often found in pairs because they were worn by the victims when they died. Their entire bodies disintegrated, but the shoes remained intact due to protective oils in the leather. In 2012, Nigerian businessman and polygamist Yoroko Onaja died after 5 of his 6 wives forced him to have intercourse with each of them. They were apparently jealous of the attention he gave to his youngest wife and threatened him with knives, demanding he sleep with them. Onaja managed to have intercourse with 4 of them, but apparently had a heart attack and stopped breathing before reaching the 5th. This video shows Florida mother Brianna Williams puking after hearing the news that the body of her missing 5-year-old daughter Taylor had been discovered. Williams first reported Taylor missing in April of 2019, 7 months before her body was found. But in reality, Brianna had horribly neglected her daughter until she tragically ended up starving to death. Brianna secretly placed Taylor's body in the back of her car, wrapped her in a garbage bag, and buried her in a shallow grave. Williams pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Often called the world's youngest political prisoner, in 1995, Gendun Chukinima was chosen at the age of 6 as the next Panchen Lama, the second highest authority of Tibetan Buddhism and the selector of the next Dalai Lama. But 3 days after being chosen, the boy and his family were kidnapped by the Chinese government and haven't been seen nor heard from in nearly 30 years since. This is the tragic story of the Boy Scout who made his entire neighborhood radioactive. Nicknamed the Nuclear Boy Scout, David Hahn was a teenager from Michigan who was obsessed with nuclear radiation. When he was only 15, David attempted to build a nuclear reactor in his backyard shed, using radioactive material from household items including vintage clocks, smoke detectors, and gun sights. Within 2 years, David had built a functioning reactor which gave off enough radiation to be detected throughout his entire neighborhood. David was soon caught by police when they found hazardous materials in his car during a routine stop and thought he was building an atomic bomb. When David's shed was raided by the EPA, they determined that his project had created dangerous levels of radiation, leading them to dismantle the building and classify it as hazardous waste. This mugshot from 2006 shows David covered in sores as a result of his extensive exposure to radiation. This, combined with continuous legal and mental health issues, led to David's early passing at the age of 39 from an accidental overdose. In 1983, Diane Downs shot her 3 young children and then drove them to the hospital at less than 10 miles per hour. Her 7-year-old daughter had already passed by the time she arrived, while her other 2 kids were in critical condition. Diane had also shot herself in the forearm and claimed that someone tried to carjack her. But in reality, she was having an affair with a married man who didn't like kids, so she wanted to dispose of them so she could be with him. Downs was sentenced to life in prison, and the lead prosecutor adopted her 2 kids that survived. Here's an 1870 photo of an Indian guru wearing an iron collar so he could never lay down. He did this by choice as a sign of devotion to his religion, believing that suffering allows one to grow closer to the spiritual. In 2019, Fred Pepperman swam out to rescue his 3 daughters who were caught in a riptide on a Florida beach. After saving them all, he fell unconscious and passed away on the way to the hospital. His final words to them were, "I got you." While investigating the illegal shark fin trade for the BBC special Gordon's Shark Bait in 2011, Gordon Ramsay and his crew were attacked by a group of men linked to drug networks in Costa Rica. They were held at gunpoint, doused with petrol, and told they would be killed if they continued filming. The shark fin trade continues to flourish to this day due to the high demand of shark fin soup, resulting in about 100 million sharks being killed every year. This was the obituary of Kathleen Demlow, who doesn't appear to be missed by her family. Here's a photo of Barbara Graham saying goodbye to her 2-year-old son Tommy before being executed via gas chamber in 1955. She was convicted for her part in the brutal murder of elderly widow Mabel Monahan during a home invasion gone wrong. In 1988, Hawaiian musician Israel Kana'i Kamakawi Vole called the owner of a recording studio at 3 a.m. when he was so eager to record his new idea. Despite having obviously closed for the night, the studio owner agreed since Israel was such a nice guy. Within 15 minutes, they recorded his ukulele rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow in just 1 take. Sadly, Israel struggled with morbid obesity throughout his life, at one point weighing over 750 pounds. After enduring several hospitalizations due to respiratory and cardiac issues, the legend would end up dying of respiratory failure at the young age of 38. In 1978, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen hosted a party in their New York City hotel room, the morning after which Nancy was found dead in the bathroom with a single stab wound to her abdomen. Despite being comatose on drugs the entire night and having zero recollection, Vicious admitted to this stabbing and was charged with her murder. Many believe that Nancy was actually killed by a drug dealer who was attempting to rob the drugged-up couple, and that Vicious was totally incapable of harming her considering the state he was in. But the bass player ended up dying of a drug overdose while out on bail before he could stand trial, and the case was closed. In 1996, Maryland woman Sharon Lopatko was killed in a bizarre case of consensual homicide. She had emailed dozens of men asking them to torture and kill her for mutual sexual gratification before meeting a man named Robert Glass who would follow through with her request. One morning, Sharon left her husband a note saying she would never return and told him not to track down her killer. Glass ended up strangling her to death and was soon arrested after police found the emails and discovered Sharon's body on his property. He admitted to fulfilling her torture fantasy, but also maintained that her death was an accident. Glass pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years before dying of a heart attack while in prison. This elderly couple just agreed to be euthanized. Former Royal Air Force engineer Pete Scott and his retired nurse wife Christine have signed up for a double SUI pod in Switzerland, where voluntary assisted SUI has been legal since 1942. The pair made the decision after 80-year-old Christine was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. Married for 46 years, they plan to die peacefully together in each other's arms with the help of the sarcophagus pod. This controversial death capsule works by replacing air with 100% nitrogen, which quickly renders the occupant unconscious and fully stops their breathing within 10 minutes, resulting in a swift, painless death. As stated by Pete, "We have had long, happy, healthy, fulfilled lives, but here we are in old age and it does not do nice things to you. The idea of watching the slow degradation of Chris's mental abilities is horrific to me. Obviously I would care for her to the point I could not, but she has nursed enough people with dementia throughout her career to be adamant that she wants to remain in control of herself and her life. Assisted dying gives her that opportunity, and I would not want to go on living without her." A 71-year-old man from Africa has lived in total isolation for 55 years to stay away from women. At the age of 16, he locked himself into a home secured by a 15-foot fence to avoid any possible interactions with females. He reportedly suffers from gynophobia, an irrational fear of women. A 26-year-old mum from the UK has died after traveling to Turkey for a Brazilian butt lift. The official cause of death was a fat embolism after some of the injected fat apparently entered her bloodstream. Many health professionals consider BBLs to be barbaric procedures because of the significant health risks associated with them that are seldom discussed. In July of 1518, a French woman ran from her house and started dancing fervently in the street. Within a week, a few dozen others had joined her, and by the next month, hundreds fell victim to this dancing plague. They danced completely uncontrollably and seemingly without reason, often for days on end, until they collapsed from exhaustion or even died from heart attacks or strokes. Up to 400 people in total died before the phenomenon suddenly stopped. It's widely believed that the dancing plague was caused by stress-induced hysteria or poisoning from a wheat fungus called ergot. During an SAS training exercise in 1996, 21-year-old Bear Grylls broke his back after falling 16,000 feet when his parachute failed to open. His surgeon wasn't sure if Grylls would ever walk again, but the survival expert climbed Mount Everest just 18 months later, becoming the youngest Brit to ever do it. Here's a photo of 13-year-old Barbara Kent and her fellow campers playing in a New Mexico river, just hours before the first atomic bomb was tested 40 miles away from them. Over the next few days, the area was covered in fallout flakes that the campers thought was snow, only it was hot instead of cold. The US government had selected the site for its supposed isolation, but in reality, thousands of people were within a 40-mile radius and weren't evacuated nor warned before the test. Despite being diagnosed with 4 different types of cancers throughout her life, Barbara was the only girl in the above photo who lived past the age of 30, somehow making it to 83. Found in a jungle cave in 1867, a feral boy named Dina Sanichar preferred eating raw meat, had trouble standing on 2 legs, growled like a wolf, chewed on bones to sharpen his teeth, and never learned how to speak. He eventually became the inspiration for Mowgli in the Jungle Book. In 2016, 11-year-old Nebraska girl Lulu Gilreath was going on her first carnival ride when it quickly turned into anyone's worst nightmare. Her hair got caught in the machinery of a spinning ride at a carnival, and her scalp was almost completely torn off. The horrible accident damaged both of her eyes and nearly killed her. After World War II, Japanese General Hitoshi Imamura was sentenced to 10 years in prison after failing to control his unit, which committed horrible atrocities toward Allied soldiers. Believing that his own sentence was too light compared to the men under his command, Imamura built a replica prison in his garden where he stayed for decades until his death in 1968.